Single mom returned a mafia boss's lost briefcase. Her life changed overnight. Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day and that good luck finds you wherever you are. Before we dive into today's unforgettable story, could I borrow just 5 seconds of your good fortune? Please help this channel grow by subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss another heartfelt journey. Thank you so much for your kindness, your time, and your continued support. It truly means more than you know. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching this video from? And what time is it there right now? Grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's begin a story that proves one honest choice can change a life forever. They say the smallest act of honesty is often witnessed by the most powerful stranger. The rain had been falling since before sunset, turning the streets of downtown Chicago into mirrors that reflected red brake lights and tired faces. By the time I finished my second shift at the neighborhood grocery store, my sneakers were soaked through, my shoulders ached, and all I could think about was getting home before my 7-year-old son, Ethan, woke up and realized I wasn't there yet. Being a single mom meant every minute belonged to someone else before it ever belonged to me. Rent was due in 4 days. My old Honda needed new brakes. Ethan's elementary school had sent another reminder about the upcoming science field trip, and I still hadn't figured out how I was going to afford it. Life wasn't falling apart. It was simply balanced on the edge of one more unexpected bill. I pulled my jacket tighter against the cold wind and crossed the nearly empty parking garage behind the shopping plaza. Most people hurried past with their heads down, eager to escape the weather. Then I noticed it. A dark leather briefcase rested beside a concrete pillar as if someone had placed it there only seconds earlier. It looked expensive. Impossibly expensive. The kind of briefcase executives carried in glass office towers. Not something forgotten beside a puddle in a public garage. I stopped, looked around. Nothing. Just the steady echo of rain, dripping through the open levels of the structure and the distant hum of traffic. Whoever owned it had to be searching for it. I crouched carefully and picked it up by the handle. It was heavier than I expected. For one brief moment, every fear a struggling parent secretly carries crossed my mind. What if there was cash inside? Enough to solve every problem waiting for me at home. Enough to replace my car, pay my rent, and let Ethan stop pretending he didn't notice when I skipped dinner so he could have seconds. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. My mother used to tell me that hard times reveal who you really are, not who you wish you could become. I wasn't going to let desperation rewrite the person she had raised me to be. I searched the outside for a luggage tag or business card, but found nothing except beautifully stitched black leather and silver initials engraved near the lock. DM. Before I could think any further, a vibration pulsed through the briefcase. Then another. It wasn't coming from outside. There was a phone inside. The ringing grew louder, steady, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Around me, people kept walking without even glancing my way, almost as if they were afraid to get involved. My heart began to pound. I hesitated only a second before pressing the small answer button built into the side compartment without opening the case itself. Silence greeted me first. Then a calm, measured male voice spoke through the speaker. "Tell the boss we found a briefcase." The line went dead before I could answer. I stood frozen beneath the gray parking garage lights, gripping the handle tighter as cold rain drifted through the open level, suddenly realizing this wasn't just something someone had accidentally left behind. Somehow, without meaning to, I had stepped into a story far bigger than my own. I stared at the silent phone for several long seconds before realizing my fingers had gone numb around the handle. The voice had been calm, almost emotionless, but something about those 7 words settled deep in my chest like a warning I could not explain. "Tell the boss we found the briefcase." Found it, not returned it. Whoever had called believed. Someone else already had possession of it. I looked around the nearly empty parking garage again. The handful of people still walking to their cars never slowed down, never glanced toward me, and somehow that made everything feel even stranger. If this briefcase mattered that much, standing here was probably the worst decision I could make. I hurried to my Honda, placed the briefcase carefully on the passenger seat, locked the doors, and started the engine. Instead of driving home, I searched for the closest police station on my phone. My thumb hovered over the directions before another thought stopped me. What if someone had already reported it missing? What if there was an identification card inside a side pocket that could help me contact the owner without opening the locked compartment? At the next red light, I examined the exterior more closely. Hidden beneath the leather handle was a small silver card embossed with an address on North Michigan Avenue. No company name, no phone number, just an address. 20 minutes later, I pulled in front of a building that looked less like an office and more like a private luxury hotel. Black SUVs lined the curb. Men wearing tailored dark suits stood near the entrance, speaking quietly through discreet earpieces. Every instinct told me to turn around. I was wearing a grocery store uniform beneath a faded jacket, driving a car older than my son, and carrying a briefcase that clearly belonged to someone whose world looked nothing like mine. I almost shifted into reverse. Then I pictured Ethan asleep on our worn-out couch because he insisted on waiting until I got home every night. If I wanted him to grow up believing honesty mattered, I had to live by it even when it felt uncomfortable. I stepped out into the cool night air, brushed the rain from my sleeves, and walked toward the entrance. Before I reached the glass doors, one of the suited men stepped forward with surprising politeness. "Ma'am, may I help you?" I lifted the briefcase slightly. "I think someone here lost this." His expression changed instantly. Not panic, recognition. He pressed one finger against the earpiece hidden beneath his collar while never taking his eyes off the case. Within seconds, another man appeared, then another. None of them looked threatening. They simply formed a respectful circle, almost as though protecting something valuable rather than confronting me. "Please come inside," the first man said quietly. The lobby was silent except for soft piano music drifting through hidden speakers. Marble floors reflected warm golden light from crystal chandeliers overhead. I had never stood anywhere so elegant in my life. Every step felt louder than it should have. An elevator opened without anyone pressing a button, and one of the men gestured toward it. We rode upward in complete silence until the doors revealed a private penthouse floor overlooking the glowing Chicago skyline. At the far end of the room stood a tall man facing the windows, his white dress shirt rolled neatly to his forearms, revealing intricate black tattoos that disappeared beneath the fabric. He turned slowly as we approached. Sharp blue eyes met mine with calm intensity. He did not look at my face first. He looked directly at the briefcase in my hands. Then, after a long, unreadable silence, he asked in a steady voice, "Did you open it?" I shook my head before I even realized I was answering him. "No, I did not." My voice sounded smaller than I intended inside the enormous penthouse. The man held my gaze for another long second, as if measuring whether honesty had a sound. Then he walked toward me with slow, controlled steps. He was taller than I had first thought, well over 6 feet, and the black ink covering his forearms disappeared beneath the neatly rolled sleeves of his white shirt. None of it felt intimidating because of what he did. It was the quiet confidence that surrounded him. The room itself seemed to wait for him to speak. Without another word, I held out the briefcase. He accepted it carefully, almost respectfully, and placed it on a polished walnut table. One of the men beside him immediately stepped forward with a small silver key. The locks clicked open. I looked away out of instinct. Whatever belonged inside was never meant for my eyes. The man noticed. "You can look," he said calmly. "If you wanted to, you already would have." I slowly turned back. Neatly organized folders rested beside a laptop, several sealed envelopes, and a velvet box no larger than a deck of cards. Everything appeared untouched. He examined each item with remarkable precision, never rushing, never allowing emotion to show across his face. The others remained completely silent. Finally, he reached beneath a hidden divider inside the case and removed a thin cream-colored envelope that seemed almost invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. His expression changed. It was subtle, almost impossible to notice, but the tension around his eyes softened. He looked toward one of his associates. "Everything is here." The room seemed to breathe again. Several men exchanged relieved glances without saying a word. I did not understand why one simple envelope mattered so much, but I understood that it did. The man closed the briefcase and turned back toward me. My name is Damian Moretti. I swallowed quietly. The name meant nothing to me, but judging by the reactions around the room, it clearly meant something to everyone else. Emily Carter, I replied. I work at Green Valley Market. A faint smile almost reached his face. Almost. You drove across the city after a long shift to return something that most people would have kept. I shrugged awkwardly. It was not mine. He studied me again, this time differently, almost with curiosity instead of caution. Do you always make difficult decisions so easily? I laughed softly before I could stop myself. It did not feel easy. For the first time, the corners of his mouth lifted. It was not a full smile, but it transformed his entire expression. One of the suited men looked genuinely surprised, as though smiles from Damian Moretti were exceptionally rare. Damian reached into his jacket and removed a thick envelope. Please accept this as a reward. I stepped back immediately. No, thank you. The room became perfectly still again. Emily, he said gently, you earned it. I shook my head once more. If I took money for returning something that already belonged to you, then it would not have been honesty anymore. It would have become a transaction. His blue eyes never left mine. Something thoughtful settled behind them. Slowly, he lowered the envelope without another attempt to persuade me. Very well. He nodded once, almost to himself. Would you allow someone to walk you to your car? I smiled politely. I've been taking care of myself for a long time. I will be all right. As I turned toward the elevator, I never noticed Damian quietly opening a folder that one of his associates handed him. Inside rested a single sheet containing the information they had already gathered in only a few minutes. Emily Carter, age 31, widowed, 1 son, 2 jobs, past due rent, aging vehicle, no criminal record, no debts beyond ordinary bills. Damian closed the folder slowly and looked toward the elevator doors just before they disappeared. Find out everything, he said quietly, not because I distrust her, because I have not met someone like her in a very long time. The next morning felt ordinary enough to convince me that the strange encounter had simply become another unbelievable memory. Ethan sat at our tiny kitchen table eating cereal while proudly explaining why his cardboard volcano would absolutely win first place at the school science fair. I smiled, pretending my mind was not busy calculating grocery prices, utility bills, and the rent that was due before the end of the week. That was motherhood. You learn to carry fear quietly so your child never had to. After dropping Ethan off at school, I drove toward work, only to hear a terrible grinding sound every time I pressed the brake pedal. My heart sank. I could not afford another repair. During my lunch break, I called the neighborhood mechanic who had worked on my Honda before. He answered with unusual enthusiasm. Emily, I was just about to call you. Your car is ready. I blinked in confusion. Ready for what? He laughed softly. The brake replacement. New pads, new rotors, full inspection. Whoever paid for it told us not to bother you. I felt my stomach tighten. There has to be some mistake. I never brought my car in. The mechanic paused. The tow truck picked it up from your apartment parking lot before sunrise. They had your keys. I thanked him politely, but the conversation only left me with more questions than answers. After work, I arrived at the repair shop expecting a misunderstanding. Instead, my old Honda looked better than it had in years. It had even been washed. The mechanic handed me the keys with a smile. Drive safe. Whoever your friend is, they really care about you. I did not have a friend who could afford something like this, I admitted. He simply shrugged. Then maybe you made a better impression on someone than you realized. The drive home felt smoother, quieter, almost unreal. When I reached my apartment building, another surprise was waiting. Mrs. Wilson, our elderly landlord, hurried down the front steps before I could unlock my door. Emily, I have been trying to reach you all afternoon. My pulse quickened. I was certain she was going to ask for the overdue rent. Instead, she smiled warmly and handed me an envelope. Someone paid the next 3 months in full this morning. They asked to remain anonymous. I stared at her without speaking. She nodded. They also left a note. My fingers trembled slightly as I unfolded the small card inside. There were only 6 neatly printed words. kindness always finds its way home. No signature, no initials, nothing else. That evening, after Ethan proudly showed me his completed science project, I tucked him into bed and sat alone beside the living room window. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass while the mysterious note rested in my hands. I replayed every conversation from the previous night, every expression, every word. One face returned to my thoughts again and again. Damian Moretti. I immediately shook my head. It could not be him. A man like that had no reason to think about a grocery store cashier after their paths crossed for a few minutes. Somewhere across the city, however, Damian stood inside his office overlooking the skyline while one of his trusted associates finished a report. The rent has been paid. The vehicle has been repaired. She still has no idea. Damian looked out at the lights below without turning around. Good. The associate hesitated before asking, should we tell her? Damian answered almost immediately. No. Gratitude expects recognition. Respect asks for nothing in return. Then he quietly picked up the handwritten thank you note Emily had unknowingly left inside the briefcase the night before, folded it once more, and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, as though it were far more valuable than anything money could ever buy. For the next several days, life settled into a rhythm that almost convinced me everything extraordinary had ended. I worked my morning shift at the grocery store, picked Ethan up from school, helped him practice spelling words at the kitchen table, and quietly wondered who had changed our lives without asking for anything in return. I try to focus on normal things. It was easier that way. But little moments kept reminding me that someone, somewhere, was paying attention. One rainy afternoon, Ethan came running toward me outside of school with the biggest smile I'd seen in months. Mom, they said my science trip is already paid for. I stopped walking. Are you sure? He nodded excitedly. Mrs. Bennett said a donor wanted every kid to have the same chance. His excitement was contagious, but my heart grew heavier. Another anonymous gift. Another impossible coincidence. That evening, while Ethan colored dinosaurs at the living room table, I stared at the growing collection of unexplained kindnesses. The repaired car, the paid rent, the field trip. None of it felt random anymore. Across the city, Damian Moretti sat in the private dining room of his office, listening as one of his trusted associates reviewed the latest report. She accepted every blessing because she believed they came from different places, the man said. Damian looked down at a photograph of Emily laughing as Ethan chased pigeons through a neighborhood park earlier that afternoon. The image had been taken from a respectful distance, carefully avoiding any intrusion into their lives. Damian studied the smile on her face for a long moment. Good, he replied quietly. She deserves a few peaceful days. Before anyone could answer, another associate entered the room carrying a thin folder. His expression had changed. We have a problem. Damian immediately looked up. Explain. The folder opened across the polished table. Someone else has been asking questions about the woman who returned your briefcase. Damian's calm expression remained unchanged, but his blue eyes sharpened. Who? We have not confirmed their identity yet. They have been reviewing parking garage security footage from the night the briefcase disappeared. They know a woman found it before it reached you. Damian remained silent. The room suddenly felt colder. Do they know her name? The associate shook his head. Not yet, but they're getting closer. Damian stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. He folded his hands behind his back, the black tattoos disappearing beneath the sleeves of his dark jacket. Increase observation around Emily and her son. Protection, the associate asked. Damian answered after a thoughtful pause. Protection without interference. They must never feel watched. The following Saturday morning, Ethan begged me to stop at our favorite neighborhood bakery after soccer practice. It had become our little tradition whenever I could spare a few extra dollars. We laughed together as he carefully chose a chocolate chip muffin almost as large as his face. For a little while, life felt wonderfully ordinary. As we stepped back onto the sidewalk, I noticed a dark sedan parked across the street. There was nothing unusual about the car itself. It was the same one I had seen outside the grocery store 2 days earlier, and again near Ethan's school the previous afternoon. I told myself I was imagining things. Cities were full of similar cars. Still, when I buckled Ethan into the back seat of my Honda, I glanced into the mirror. The sedan remained parked exactly where it was. It did not move until I pulled away. Then, several car lengths behind us, it quietly entered traffic as well. I tightened my hands around the steering wheel without saying a word. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was nothing at all. But for the first time since returning that forgotten briefcase, I no longer felt like my life belonged only to me. By Monday morning, I had almost convinced myself I had imagined the dark sedan. Chicago traffic was full of identical cars, and fear had a way of connecting dots that did not belong together. I refused to let anxiety steal the little piece Ethan and I had fought so hard to build. After dropping him off at school, I worked my shift as usual, smiling at customers, stocking shelves, and pretending my thoughts were not drifting back to that anonymous note folded inside my purse. Kindness always finds its way home. I repeated those words silently whenever doubt crept in. They reminded me that goodness still existed somewhere in the world. Late that afternoon, heavy clouds rolled across the skyline, just as Ethan and I left the public library carrying a backpack full of books he insisted he would finish before the weekend. Rain began falling almost immediately. We laughed as we hurried toward the parking lot, Ethan trying to shield his favorite dinosaur book beneath his little jacket while I searched for my car keys. That was when I noticed the same dark sedan again. It sat across the lot with its headlights off. My smile faded. "Stay close to me," I whispered to Ethan. "Are we playing a game?" he asked with innocent excitement. I forced a smile. "Something like that." We reached my Honda, but before I could unlock the driver's door, another vehicle quietly rolled into the lane beside us. It was a black sport utility vehicle with deeply tinted windows. The engine stopped. For one heartbeat, the entire parking lot seemed unusually quiet. The rear door opened first. A man in a tailored black suit stepped out, followed by another. They were calm, composed, and surprisingly respectful. Neither approached too quickly. Neither raised his voice. One simply said, "Miss Carter, please remain where you are." Every protective instinct inside me awakened. I instinctively moved Ethan behind my shoulder. "Who are you?" I asked. Before either man answered, another familiar voice carried across the rain. "You are frightening her." Both suited men immediately stepped aside. Damian Moretti walked toward us beneath a large black umbrella, his dark overcoat moving gently with the wind. Raindrops rolled from the edges as though they refused to touch him. His blue eyes met mine first, then softened when they shifted to Ethan. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This is not how I wanted us to meet again." I stared at him in disbelief. "What is happening?" Damian glanced briefly toward the far side of the parking lot where the dark sedan had already begun pulling away. "Someone has been asking questions about you." "Because of the briefcase?" He nodded once. "They believe you may know something valuable." I shook my head. "I never even opened it." "I know," he answered immediately. "That is exactly why I came myself." Ethan peeked around my arm and looked curiously at Damian. "Mom, is he your friend?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. Damian crouched slightly, so he was closer to Ethan's height, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Not yet," he said with a gentle smile, "but I hope your mother will allow me to help." Ethan studied him for several thoughtful seconds before offering the dinosaur book he had been protecting from the rain. "You can hold this while Mom finds the keys." Damian accepted the book with surprising care, as though it were something priceless. I watched the tattooed man who commanded rooms full of powerful people carefully wipe a single raindrop from the colorful cover before handing it back with both hands. Something inside me shifted. Strength did not always announce itself with loud voices. Sometimes it appeared in quiet gestures no one expected. As the rain continued falling around us, Damian looked back toward the empty street where the sedan had disappeared, and although his expression remained calm, I sensed he had just broken one of his own unwritten rules. For the first time in years, he had stepped out of the shadows not to protect an empire, but to protect one ordinary mother and her little boy. That night, sleep refused to find me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Damian standing in the rain with Ethan's dinosaur book in his tattooed hands, speaking with the same quiet confidence that somehow made the entire parking lot feel safer. I wanted to believe everything he had told me. I also wanted to believe that people like him only existed in movies. The truth was much more complicated. The next morning, after dropping Ethan off at school, I stopped at a neighborhood coffee shop before work. The television mounted above the counter was broadcasting a local business report. A familiar face appeared on screen. Damian Moretti. The anchor described him as a successful investor and philanthropist whose charitable foundation had recently funded children's hospitals, community housing projects, and scholarship programs across Illinois. Customers around me admired his business success without a second thought. None of them seemed afraid. None of them knew the version of Damian that arrived with quiet security teams and black sport utility vehicles. I stood frozen with my coffee growing cold in my hands. There was clearly far more to his life than the public ever saw. That evening, after Ethan finished his homework, I searched Damian Moretti's name online. Hundreds of articles appeared. Awards, charity galas, business acquisitions, interviews where he answered every question with calm precision. Yet scattered between those polished headlines were whispers buried deep inside discussion forums. People called him powerful, untouchable, a man whose influence reached places ordinary citizens never noticed. There was never proof, only rumors. Still, they unsettled me. I closed my laptop immediately. My responsibility was not solving mysteries. My responsibility was raising my son. The following afternoon, I made a decision that hurt more than I expected. I wrote a short thank you note for everything that had been done for us and addressed it to Damian's office. Inside, I explained that his kindness had already changed our lives, but I could not allow Ethan to become connected to a world I did not understand. I asked him, respectfully, not to contact us again. As I slipped the envelope into the mailbox outside the post office, I whispered a quiet apology that only I could hear. Across the city, Damian read the letter less than 2 hours later. His trusted associate waited silently, while Damian carefully folded the page along its original crease. "She is afraid," the associate said. Damian nodded once. "She should be. Should we stop watching over them?" Damian walked toward the window overlooking the Chicago skyline. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he answered in the same calm voice Emily had come to recognize. "She believes distance will protect her son. I respect that." The associate waited. "Then we leave?" Damian slowly shook his head. "We leave her in peace. We do not leave her unprotected." At that very moment, Ethan climbed into the back seat after school with unusual excitement shining in his eyes. "Mom," he said while fastening his seatbelt, "the nice man with the blue eyes gave my teacher a whole box of books for our classroom today." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. "Did you see him?" Ethan nodded happily. "He stayed outside. He waved at everybody, but he left before school ended." I looked toward the school entrance through the rearview mirror. There was no black sport utility vehicle, no security team, no sign that Damian had ever been there. Only children laughing on the playground beneath the warm afternoon sun. Ethan smiled as he hugged one of the brand new storybooks against his chest. "Mom," he asked softly, "why does the scary-looking man keep doing nice things for us?" I searched for an answer all the way home, but the only honest one I had was the one I could not bring myself to say out loud. Some secrets do not become dangerous because they are hidden. They become dangerous because honest people stumble into them without ever realizing it. 3 quiet days passed after I mailed my letter to Damian. No mysterious gifts arrived. No black sport utility vehicles appeared outside Ethan's school. Part of me felt relieved. Another part wondered why the silence felt so heavy. I convinced myself it was finally over. Then Thursday afternoon changed everything. My shift ended just after 5, and I stopped at the neighborhood pharmacy before picking Ethan up from my sister's apartment. As I stepped outside, carrying a small paper bag with cough medicine, an elderly man standing near the entrance accidentally dropped a stack of folders. Papers scattered across the sidewalk. I immediately knelt to help him gather everything before the wind carried them into the street. "Thank you," he said with a grateful smile. "People are always too busy these days." I smiled back. My mother always said helping someone only costs a few minutes. He nodded thoughtfully before walking away. I never noticed the man sitting inside a parked sedan across the street, quietly taking photographs. Less than an hour later, Damien stood inside his private office while one of his associates placed several printed pictures on the desk. Every photograph showed Emily, helping the elderly man, picking up the papers, looking down at the sidewalk. They have mistaken her actions, the associate explained. Damien studied the images carefully. They believe the folders were exchanged intentionally. Another photograph showed the elderly stranger from a different angle. Damien recognized him immediately. The older man had once served as an accountant for a rival organization before retiring years earlier. Honest, quiet, completely unrelated to Emily. Someone is creating a false story, Damien said calmly. They want people to believe Emily is carrying information. The associate nodded, which means she has become more valuable to them than the briefcase itself. Damien closed the folder slowly. She never asked to enter this world. No. Then we make certain this world never reaches her. That evening, Ethan insisted on stopping at the neighborhood park before dinner because the weather was finally warm enough to fly his favorite bright blue kite. I watched him laugh as the kite danced above the trees, and for a little, while every fear disappeared behind the sound of my son's happiness. Then I noticed something unusual. Two unfamiliar men stood near the walking path, pretending to watch the lake. They never looked directly at us, but every few minutes one of them glanced toward Ethan. My heart began beating faster. I told myself not to panic. Families filled the park. Children chased soccer balls across the grass. Everything appeared perfectly normal. Yet something inside me whispered that normal had quietly disappeared from our lives weeks ago. As the sun dipped lower, I called Ethan back toward the parking lot. Halfway there, I heard another familiar voice behind me. Emily. I turned. Damien stood several feet away, dressed casually for the first time since we had met. No overcoat, no ombrelle, just dark jeans, a navy sweater, and the same calm blue eyes. I know you asked me to stay away, he said quietly. I intended to honor that. I looked at him without speaking. He glanced briefly toward the two men near the lake before meeting my eyes again. But someone has decided to use your kindness against you. My stomach tightened. I do not understand. Damien's expression remained steady, but there was unmistakable concern in his voice. You returned my briefcase. Now others believe you are carrying something even more important. I looked toward Ethan, who was happily winding the string around his kite without the slightest idea that invisible storms had begun gathering around the simple, honest life we had worked so hard to build. The moment Damien finished speaking, I looked at Ethan, who was still smiling as he carefully folded the bright blue kite into its bag. My son deserved a childhood filled with playgrounds, homework, and bedtime stories, not unanswered questions and invisible dangers. I took a slow breath and faced Damien. Tell me the truth, I whispered. No more protecting me with half answers. He held my gaze without hesitation. The briefcase contained documents that exposed someone I once trusted. Those documents never disappeared, but someone wants to believe they did. They cannot accept that an honest woman simply returned what she found. They need a different story because it excuses their own mistakes. I searched his face for deception and found only quiet certainty. So they think I have something I never even saw. He nodded. Yes. I looked toward Ethan again before speaking. I cannot spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Damien answered softly. Neither can I. That is why it ends now. Over the following week, everything changed with remarkable speed. Rumors faded as quietly as they had appeared. The unfamiliar cars stopped circling our neighborhood. The strangers disappeared from the park and the grocery store. Whatever conversation Damien needed to have with the people responsible happened far away from my world, exactly as he had promised. He never described it, and I never asked. Some doors were better left closed. Life slowly found its rhythm again. Ethan returned to worrying about spelling tests instead of wondering why mysterious cars parked near his school. I worked my shifts without constantly checking every reflection in the store windows. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without waiting for something unexpected to happen. Damien kept his promise as well. He no longer watched from a distance or arranged anonymous surprises. Instead, he appeared openly, always calling first, always respecting every boundary I set. Sometimes he joined Ethan and me for dinner at a small neighborhood restaurant. Sometimes he brought books after learning Ethan loved dinosaurs almost as much as space. He never arrived with expensive gifts. He arrived with time, patience, and an attention that could not be purchased. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan convinced both of us to help build the volcano for his science fair in our tiny kitchen. Baking soda somehow ended up across the counter. Red food coloring stained Damien's sleeve, and a serious man whose presence once silenced entire rooms laughed so hard that Ethan nearly fell off his chair from laughing with him. I realized then that the strongest people were not those who inspired fear. They were the ones who made children feel safe enough to laugh. Months later, after Ethan won second place at the science fair, we walked together beside Lake Michigan as the evening sun painted the water with shades of gold. Ethan ran ahead, chasing seagulls, while Damien and I followed at an easy pace. "You changed my life," I said quietly. He smiled and gently shook his head. "No, Emily. You changed mine tonight. You chose honesty over opportunity. You reminded me that trust still exists." I reached for his hand without thinking. He looked down at our fingers intertwined before looking back into my eyes. "May I?" he asked softly. I already knew what he meant. I nodded. His kiss was gentle, brief, and filled with gratitude more than. "Promise." When we stepped apart, Ethan turned around and grinned from several yards away. "Are we finally a team now?" Damien looked at me first. I smiled through unexpected tears and answered before he could. "Yes, sweetheart. I think we are." As we continued walking together beneath the fading sunset, I understood a lesson I would carry for the rest of my life. Wealth can build impressive buildings. Power can command respect. But one honest choice, made by an ordinary heart expecting nothing in return, can build the kind of family that changes every life it touches forever.